Hello and welcome to podcast number 39 from the Self-Publishing Formula.
Two writers, one just starting out, the other a bestseller. Join James Blatch and Mark Dawson and their amazing guests as they discuss how you can make a living telling stories. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello Mark Dawson, how are you?
Hello James Blatch, I'm fine, how are you?
Well, I caught your cold last week, so obviously the link we use is a really powerful digital link. I've had a real proper man flu cold. I'm on the back end of it now, but I don't, that type of cold that women don't really understand how much men suffer from when we get it.
I'm not getting involved in that conversation, James. That's not my life's worth more than that.
I can hear things being thrown at I could say the radio, but whatever people are listening or watching on. We finally got our video sort of sorted out as well. Here we are in nice, glorious split screen for video. So if you're enjoying that, and increasingly when we do the interviews, as long as our interviewees are happy with that, we're going to use video as well. So I've interviewed a guy called Chris Ducker this morning, who lives in the Philippines. Actually, is a UK citizen, coming back to the UK soon. He's a big entrepreneur in this area. Really interesting guy to talk to. Lots of good advice on brand building as a personal thing, as authors in particular, how to build your brand, and also a bit about how to build your team. Once you start earning a bit more money and you get busy, you need to increase your team, and how you do that using virtual assistants and so on. So Chris Ducker's interview coming up in the next short while. But from where we're sitting at the moment, there you go, there's that cold. Where we're sitting at the moment, Mark, what is it, the 14th today? 15th? What date is it?
15th.
15th. So we are 15 days away from launching 101. We've got everything up there and loaded onto the Teachable platform, so we're seeing it in place for the first time. We're still making tweaks on a daily basis at the moment, and some changes, and more material is still coming in. We've had a team of beta testers already selected and on it. One of them has already finished, so that's somebody who's part of the SPF team and does some work for us, and she's reported. In fact, Kerry has put something in the groups already. She's so excited about it, and we've had, well, we're very pleased, aren't we, with the feedback we've had so far?
Yeah, I'm very pleased with it. You never really know these things until someone else goes in and tests it, much the same way as when you release a new book. You've been working on it for such a long time. It's always a nervy moment when you let other people look at it for the first time, and of course it's just the same, and I was a little anxious before Kerry got into it, but she's been so positive with her praise. It's very encouraging, so I'm pretty pleased with how it's looking, and we're still adding stuff, and I can't really announce this yet, but we're looking for maybe an additional couple of sessions from someone really, really big. I mean, really, really big in the indie space. It will be worth getting the course just for these two sessions. It's not confirmed yet, but I'm hoping to close that down in the next couple of days or so. So still kind of moving on, adding stuff in, working on the bonuses, and then we'll be ready to open the doors in a couple of weeks. So yeah, very, very exciting time.
And there's one clear winner from this whole 101 process, which is me, because I've had so much value for my author career, including jamesblatch.com, which is finally up there as of this morning. We've created it in several places using different platforms as part of the course. So if you want to go down the WordPress route, which is more involved potentially for you, there's a session on that, a very good detailed session on that. But also, if you want to do it more quickly and more easily, just create a landing page, for instance, using lead pages, there's a session on that, and the result of which is that I get a free page, which is there now. So, and talking about my author career, so I was invited on to Radio 4 in the UK. So Radio 4 is, I don't know what the equivalent is in the States. It's not really national broadcasting. It's the BBC anyway. It's the BBC's main news channel in the UK. It's the place everyone listens to find out whether we're going to war or not. And during the middle of the day, they have a consumer-orientated program called You and Yours. And 6 years ago, I did a small piece on it about NaNoWriMo when I started that, and they invited me back. And we talked about self-publishing. They were fascinated with your story, Mark. They were fascinated with the course that we've done. Excuse me. I can't edit this for video. And so we got to chat about self-publishing, and there was a little bit of trolling in there. One of the questions from the wonderful Peter White, who's a fantastic, one of my favourite broadcasters in the UK, He always enjoys his interviews. I enjoy speaking to him. But he did say, he quoted somebody from the industry, trad industry, saying that the vast majority of self-published books were tawdry and terrible and shouldn't be published. And so it gave myself and one of our key students, Adam Croft, a chance to riposte on behalf of self-publishing.
You were very diplomatic. I would not have been quite so diplomatic. I can guarantee you that.
I tried to think what you would say, but your chance will come.
I wouldn't have been invited back on the radio again.
Middle of the day language. But it just goes to show that attention is coming on. I've had a lot of tweets afterwards, people saying, I can't believe how little people seem to know about self-publishing. And I've just been, this interview with Chris Ducker is really interesting. So he's quite a big digital entrepreneur. We've got a big digital business. We've got thousands of students now. We've got hundreds of them, significant businesses in their own right. And yet when I listen to Radio 4, for instance, when I listen to the news in the morning and they talk about the economy, they talk about Brexit and the EU and Donald Trump being elected and the steel industry and car parts. And there seems to be almost oblivious to this billion-dollar industry on the digital space that we're all a part of, which is starting to sort of take over people's lives. And it's an exciting place to be, and they're slowly just catching on now, I think.
Yeah, it's why it's very encouraging. I mean, for anyone listening to this podcast, you're years ahead of the mainstream, and that's a really exciting opportunity. You occasionally you'll hear people saying, "Oh, self-publishing is dead, ebook sales are down, everything is doom and gloom. I've missed the boat," all that kind of stuff. But it couldn't be further from the truth. We're right at the start, the crest of a wave here, and the fact that people are choosing to listen to you and me whitter on about this is just it's kind of evidence that they are ahead of the curve, and you get the people that we heard coming to us after the Radio 4 piece. We had lots of emails from people asking about when can they get the course and all that kind of stuff. Those people are months and months and months behind listeners to the show, and I think that's just underlines what a great opportunity it is still for people to put a stake in the ground and start to develop their online books businesses.
Yeah. Great. Okay, look, let's get on to the meat and drink of today's podcast. We've got one of our favourite contributors on. We spoke to him briefly in London in April. He's Kevin Tumlinson from Draft2Digital, and this will form part of the 101 course as well. Draft2Digital is one of those platforms that we explore, we explain, and we even have a technical know-how session in there about using them. They are, in simple terms, an aggregator in that they take your book and they upload it and they place it onto various sites that will sell your book. And it's a kind of one-stop shop. So once you get into this, you start to understand that it can be quite laborious getting yourself set up on each individual site. You've got tax interviews and that sort of thing to do. So Draft2Digital do a lot of that for you. They have a lot of value-added stuff. Actually, they provide free of charge, including formatting your book. But Kevin Tomlinson's a fascinating guy to talk to, not least because he's about to undergo a kind of lifestyle experiment, which we come on to in the interview, and it's quite an interesting thing. And it's, I think, again, for people in our space, in the digital space, it just shows what's possible once you're no longer doing the 9 to 5. So, without further ado, let's hear from Kevin. Okay, so Kevin Tumlinson joins us from Draft2Digital. Kevin, hello again.
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
We meet around the world, don't we? London, Florida.
We're very international.
And you have a fascinating side, which I think we might get to at some point in this interview, about your own domestic arrangements and how they're going to look in
Yeah, that's fine. It factors in somewhat with Draft2Digital. They're behind some of this. So
okay. Well, we'll leave that tantalizingly hanging there for the moment. First of all, let's talk about Draft2Digital. And I know I asked you this at the London Book Fair, but particularly for those of us who are sort of starting our novel writing career, can you explain to us what you do?
Okay, so Draft2Digital does numerous things for an author, but where we start is in converting your manuscript into ebook format. And we have a very clean, very cool format and process for that. It handles a lot of that stuff automatically. And we're able to add in, at your request, you get to select these options, but you can add in things like teasers for your next book, a a notification so that readers can be notified every time you publish. Table of contents is of course in there. All the things you expect as far as in matter are included in that. And it's very, it runs light, we'll say. Instead of there being a bunch of junk code in it, we made it very clean. And so it's compatible with all the various e-readers. So that's the sort of first step thing that we offer. In addition to that, we offer the biggest thing we're known for really is distribution. We have several vendors worldwide, so we can get you into a worldwide audience. And we go through the trouble of all the vetting and customer service and all the things that help us have a little more sway with these vendors. And so they like dealing with us. And so we're able to get promos and other things that we can pass on to authors. So that worldwide distribution is kind of the thing we're most known for, getting into markets. Of course, we get you into Apple iBooks, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, a whole bunch of others. And so that's what we're most famous for, I'll say.
Okay, yeah, that distribution. All right, so there's really two sides to it, the formatting and distribution. Well, let's just get the formatting bit out of the way. And,
sure.
I have to be honest that when I first started getting involved in self-publishing, I didn't really have a clue as to how this stuff worked and really what formatting was. And I think if you'd asked me, I would have assumed at some point I uploaded my Word document to Amazon and they created a Kindle book out of it, and the same at Barnes & Noble. And it's not like that. You actually have to create a little file, which is a little bit different for every single platform. And that technical process of turning your Word document or whatever you exported from Scrivener or whatever into that file, it's actually not just a technical process, it's actually a bit of an art form as well, because you want your book to be beautifully presented at that point.
Right.
So there are options. You can do it yourself. There are some DIY options out there. You can employ somebody who works directly for you, more or less, and does that formatting. And I guess you're somewhere in between. You're effectively employing somebody to do it, but you're an organization that does it for a lot of people. And I was interested in the fact, Kevin, that you talked about a lot of it being automated, but I'm guessing that still has to be somebody looking at each individual file at some point.
Well, actually, the process itself is fully automated. So you upload, and here's where we think we're being very helpful. I believe we're being very helpful. You can upload just your Word document, for example. And if you wrote it in Scrivener and exported it as an RTF or a Word document, we still use that. But we strip out all the sort of junk code that Microsoft Word and other programs sort of insert by default. And then we have everything automated so that it spits out, a clean, perfect EPUB or .mobi or, even a PDF. And all that's there are no human eyes really that touch that except your own. You can verify, how the layout looks, make sure everything looks the way you want it to. And if there are, quirks or questions, then we have this phenomenal customer service who will at that point go in and make manual adjustments if needed.
And do you give people advice on how to prepare the file in the first place? Because your software's got to pick up chapter breaks, and in some cases, some novels are divided into parts and so on.
Yeah, it's advisable that you use, like, for example, in Microsoft Word, you're going to want to use like the heading. The term has just blown right out of my mind, and I apologize, but they have their styles. Like little style sheets that you can choose for heading 1, heading 2, that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
And so we'll pick up on that. And that's how we construct your table of contents. And if when you get to, there's a point where you get to sort of review that table of contents before you publish. And if it doesn't look right, if it doesn't include some of your chapters, then you can contact us and we'll add those in and fix them for you. But for the most part, we don't have to provide any real guidelines because most people do this by default. If they just put, chapter 1, chapter 2, we'll pretty much pick up on that. It's easier if you do use headings for that stuff, but you almost do that by default. All the major writing software that's out there does that by default. Yeah. Makes it really easy. Authors are very focused on making sure that they've delineated their chapters and subheadings and that sort of thing most of the time. So it's actually pretty easy to scan and find that stuff.
Yeah.
makes it easy to output a clean file.
That's how everyone wants to write. They think in chapters from the beginning because that's kind of how we do it. So
I mean, honestly, you're doing all the work of organizing right up front. So we don't need to do that for you. But we will pick up on that system you've used, and we'll spit out the appropriate chapters, and the title of the book and everything gets folded in through the metadata of the book gets handled right from the beginning, right when you're uploading your manuscript. So you'll tell us what the title is. You'll tell us if there's a subtitle. Is it part of a series? What volume is it? All that stuff gets taken care of. And so it can be folded in automatically, including like a copyright page. So if you didn't put a copyright page in your book, we can generate one for you. And what happens is you get a whole selection of these things, and you just check the box next to the ones you want. And then that's it. And this is all free, by the way. We don't charge a dime to do any of this stuff. We only make money on a percentage of royalty.
Yeah. So which moves us on to the aggregating side. I think that's the right word. Is it aggregating?
Yeah.
Which is really getting your book into the places where readers are going to be able to buy it. And as you say, that's kind of what you're famous for. So this process, I mean, people will have an idea that they want to sell their book on as many platforms as possible, or they'll make conscious decisions about sticking to one or going wide or all the rest of it. Once they've made their decision to do that, I guess it's reasonably complicated to set out to do this by yourself.
Yeah, it's okay. Now I'm going to start talking to you as an author. From well before I started working with Draft2Digital, I initially went and tried to get into all the various ebook markets, and it became a nightmare on multiple fronts. Not only just the fact that every retailer has their own set of rules for formatting and cover size, and all the various rules that impact the way you have to work. But there's also the reporting side. If I made sales, like now I had 40 or 50 different storefronts I had to check regularly to make sure I knew what my sales were and make sure I was being paid. So I actively went looking for services that would help me aggregate that. And of course, there's Smashwords, which I tried. I didn't particularly like and I'm talking now as an author. I didn't particularly like it as a
completely accept that. Yes.
Yeah.
As a user, as an author.
Yeah. I mean, that's all it really was. I mean, I think Mark Coker, he helped create an industry here, and we're very grateful to him for it. But the user experience there wasn't quite what I wanted. It was, at times frustrating. And that was the same feeling that Aaron Pogue had when he's one of the founders of Draft2Digital, and he created this service is all about making things easier and cleaner and simpler. And I think we've done a fantastic job with that. So where we help the author with this stuff largely is with this centralized dashboard that's very well designed, very easy to understand, where you can see your sales. You can, exactly how many volumes you've sold this month versus last month, and you can generate reports of all kinds. And there's no, there's no special formatting to worry about. None of that stuff applies. It's all very easy.
And you have a relationship with these distributors. This is not simply you uploading them, but that they know that you have a library of authors and of users, and that puts you presumably in a position then to do some value-added stuff.
Exactly right. Yeah. In some cases, there are advantages we can offer that the individual author might not be able to get as far as promotions. And for a time, Barnes & Noble has changed this now, but I mean, for a time, the only way you could get a book listed for free on Barnes & Noble was through us. So now you can do that directly, but I think most authors still prefer to do it through us. We get, because we handle sort of all the customer service and all the hassles that the retailers would have to deal with, we sort of handle all that in-house. And we're producing a huge volume of authors and work books to these vendors as one client. I mean, it does give us some sway. We can't just ask for anything we want, but when we go and talk to them, they're more prone to listen to us. And so we've been able to help, quite a few authors get onto, I don't want to say it this way because I don't want it to sound like we've got some sort of through line to like bestsellers lists, but we've helped with promotions, and some of these authors have hit bestsellers lists. We've got quite a few New York Times and USA Today bestsellers in our database.
So let me just try to work out how this works. If you set up an account, let's say Barnes & Noble, and I want to distribute my book through Barnes & Noble, so I go there and I create an account and I fill in my bank details and my tax details, all the rest of it, and then I start uploading my books. If I come to you, there's one upload, and you don't create an account for me. You use presumably your account, but you then just filter the money back through me. So I don't have to worry about a lot of that other stuff.
Right. We have a tax interview so that we can help you take care of the tax side of everything. That was a big innovation over the past, over the past year.
But one tax interview, because I've done one.
Exactly.
Funnily enough, I've done one today for the very big orange company owned by Jeff, and it's a painful process, the tax interview, and presumably I would have to do another one at Barnes & Noble and Kobo and iBooks, etc.
Yeah, that was one of the author pain points that we discovered and wanted to solve, and it was not an easy problem to solve. I mean, it was an expensive problem to solve,
Right.
but this one tax interview covers all your bases with all the different vendors we deal with. So that's before I ever came to these guys, I used to just promote the crap out of them everywhere on every podcast I ever appeared on, because I love this aspect. But they saw these pain points. Taxes were an issue. Dealing with multiple sales channels, getting paid. I mean, all this stuff, these are small. They're very big issues actually, but they're small little details that get away from you very quickly. And so we went and made all that easier. But that was the point.
Yeah. I can see the attraction of that straight away. And we haven't mentioned, I don't think, the pricing model that you have. Do you want to explain that now?
Okay. So the only way we make any money is if you sell a book. So it really is in our best interest for you to sell as many books as possible. And we make a 10% royalty off of the retail price of the book. Overall, it ends up, after all is said and done, it ends up being about a 15% cut from your overall royalty. That's because 10% goes to us, money goes to the vendor, of course. You've got that's sort of your overhead. And I've always considered that sort of it's a premium you pay to make your life easier. So I was always fine with it. And of course, if we're helping you in increasing the volume of sales,
well, that's the point, isn't it? If there's even a small amount of that is going to cover that.
Right. That's the goal. I mean, that's the idea. There's never any guarantees that that's going to happen for anybody. But my personal take has always been that your odds are better. And one of the things people don't necessarily consider about marketing is it really is all about improving your odds. It's never a guarantee. And so if you fold this idea in of Draft2Digital as part of your marketing strategy, you are increasing your odds, because we have that bit of sway with Barnes & Noble and Apple iBooks. Apple, they kind of like dealing with us rather than dealing with the 25,000 separate authors. It makes their lives easier. So they're very appreciative. And Apple's got a history of, if you're scratching our back, we'll scratch yours. And, we come armed with back scratchers. Yeah.
And they can afford a lot of back scratchers, because I noticed they published their quarterlies yesterday, and they have something like $286 billion in cash reserves.
Yes. Yeah.
So
it seems odd to say something along the lines of Apple's becoming a major player, because Apple always seems like they're a major player, but they're rivaling Amazon now on this front. And we're excited to see that, of course. And we have a very good relationship with Apple. So
yeah, well, they own a lot of hardware that people have in their pockets, and that
exactly,
depending on how people are going to read their books.
5 Apple devices within 3 feet of me right now.
They're like rats, aren't they, in that sense? They always say you're always within 10 yards of a rat. You're always in a few feet of an Apple device.
Exactly.
Says the man who's eagerly anticipating the MacBook Pro release tomorrow. I can't tell you how I can't wait to get that. Because
you're gonna have to let me know. I'm waiting a bit because I've been burned on early adoption in the past, but I'm very excited.
Yeah, well, I thrashed mine to death, and it's just about hanging in there. Needs replacing. Okay, look, that's a fantastic description of all of that, and people obviously can go to draft2digital.com and have a little poke about and see that. But I think particularly for new authors, this is an option that just makes them think, just sighs a little bit, because it can be overwhelming, the prospect of then distributing your book and all the things you have to do when you're self-publishing. And we're not big fans of those companies that say, we'll self-publish for you, and they basically charge you a lot for every service that a publisher does. We don't like that, but we do like these little niche parts of the digital space where you can go to and say, okay, I'm going to pay you, and you're going to take care of that part of it, and that's what you're doing there, which is great. And
honestly, one of the sort of driving, one of the ideas behind Draft2Digital is we really try to never charge the author directly for anything, and so far we've been successful at that. Like, because we're authors too. I mean, we get it. We know how hard it is to sort of maintain a budget, and there's always this sort of when you talk to people about marketing, there's this idea that everyone's got a marketing budget, but a lot of authors don't. A lot of authors, they're flying by the seat of their pants here, and we want to be able to help all authors. And we just never felt like having sort of a base charge was going to be beneficial to, the indie author just starting out. But also, even when you're making a lot of money at this and you're very successful at this, that overhead starts to add up after a while. And we don't want to be one more drop in the bucket that, could wash over you at some point.
Sure. And can authors come in and out of Draft2Digital? I mean,
absolutely.
So if they decide, actually, I'm going to upload directly from now on to this particular platform, they can do that.
Yeah, not only that, but we actually, you do not have to use us for distribution at all, and you can still get the conversion for your manuscript. So you can come convert your manuscript to .mobi, for example, and upload that to KDP and go exclusive with Amazon, and that's fine. Of course, we prefer that you go through us, but we made that service free, and it is free. That's the whole point.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to have a look at that, because I've actually today been doing a couple of screen flows on formatting for our upcoming 101 course. Yeah. And one of the sites I went to, which I won't mention, which offers a free formatting service, it really wasn't there yet. Too many messages came up saying this bit doesn't work yet. So I'm thinking I probably went to the wrong place. So I should redo that.
I should say a note on the conversion. One of the reasons we do it the way we do, because you can use services or software like Vellum, and you get a beautiful manuscript out of that. Ours overall is kind of simple, and the reason is we test this on all the different devices. A new device comes out, we grab it and we test this to make sure that our formatting is going to be essentially universal. So we vet this. I mean, we make sure that the manuscript you produce from this is usable anywhere, and you can generate. Like I said, you can do an EPUB. And by the way, if you already have an EPUB, you can still upload that to Draft2Digital. I mean, we can still.
Yeah. So if people do like the idea of spending their own time in Vellum or whatever, they can do that and then come to you with the EPUB files. Was that a dog? Did you step on it?
That was a dog. I'm sorry. She was doing okay. I think someone came in.
Okay. It just sounded like you stepped on her paw, but she's a.
No, she's just one of she's a Chihuahua. I'm sorry. These days, it seems like every podcast gets a short introduction from my dog Minnie.
Yeah, that's good. That's how it should be.
She's the unofficial mascot of Draft2Digital.
Yeah. Well, do you know, I want to come on to a couple of other aspects of Kevin Tumlinson. Well, let's talk about Kevin Tumlinson, the author, first of all. Okay. And you've been writing for a while. Is Dan Kotler Thrillers?
Yeah, that's my new series.
Okay.
It's a shift for me, honestly, because I started out writing science fiction back in 2008 was my first published work. And I've I wrote sci-fi and fantasy for a while, and I still do technically. And then let's say around this time last year, my friend and sometime co-author Nick Thacker, he writes thrillers, and he just started we have a show together, and he just started daring me on the air to write a thriller. And I did. I released it in May of this year, and it just exploded. I was very, very pleased.
Wow, this sounds frighteningly familiar to me. From our podcast, as I'm being not bullied into doing it, but I'm being gently cajoled publicly into pulling my finger out and doing my thriller. So yeah, well, that's exciting then. So and we spoke, I think, briefly about this in Florida, but this is the captures the discovery of the Norwegians or the Nordics having got to North America before anyone else did. Right.
That's the first book, called Coelho Medallion, and it's spelled so difficult that I don't even bother. But it's the general story is that Vikings actually made it into interior United States, well before the Europeans discovered the continent, and actually interacted and even lived among the Native Americans at that point. So the sort of overall premise of the series, the Dan Cutler books, is that he is an independent sort of investigator of misplaced history. And he becomes embroiled in all sorts of, terrorist activities and FBI investigations, and, all sorts of things get kind of, glommed onto this. But that's his general role, as he's investigating things that are sort of out of place historically. And that's an idea I've always enjoyed. I've always, kind of liked that notion. And the second book, by the way, is on pre-order. It's the Atlantis Riddle, and it's the same general idea, same characters. And I do sort of tie it back heavily to the first book, although they both stand alone. But yeah, they're a lot of fun. I kind of consider them sort of Dan Brown, James Rollins type stories in that vein of thriller. And that, I guess, Dan Cutler is sort of my I forget Dan Brown's Langstrom.
Yeah. Yes. What was his name?
Tom Hanks.
Yeah, it's Tom Hanks. Exactly. Yeah. I want to say Roger, but it's not Roger, is it? I have read a couple of his. I did read, obviously, like everyone read the Da Vinci Code. Robert Langston, is it? Robert Langston.
That's it. Yeah. So he's kind of that character for me.
Well, that's a good sales target as well, if you can match Dan Brown.
I think so.
Yeah.
And funny enough, I've actually, over the years, I've had a few conversations with Dan Brown. I interviewed him on a radio show I did back in the late 90s when he had released Digital Fortress, and no one had heard of him. And actually, I didn't interview him. The host of the show interviewed him that time around, but he actually mentioned the show and the host in Angels and Demons. So
there you go. That's cool. And it's really interesting, Dan Brown. It's difficult to have a conversation about publishing and writing without somebody quoting him at some point. And he's
exactly.
a very, very interesting author in the way that he writes. And you're a fool if you think that he writes down. He writes a very, very clever book, and quite difficult to do. But yeah, brilliant. Anyway, my editors talked to me about Dan Brown and his style recently. So well, that's good. And you've got your science fiction background. I think it's quite a lot. You've got quite a back catalogue. Do you know how many books you've written, top of your head?
I have around 30 books out right now.
Okay.
And growing. Sometimes I mess up on my counts because I actually have 4 or 5 that are sort of in edit and ready to go, or getting ready to go. But yeah, I think I have around 30 that are actually published at the moment.
So how many books do you turn out a year? A couple a year? More than that?
Yeah, when I first, there was a transition period for me where I started really taking this seriously, and in the course of like a year, I put out like 12 books. And then I sort of slowed that pace to where it's like a book every other month instead of a book a month. So I may put out between, we'll say, 3 to 6 books in a year. If I push it, I could do a lot more. It's just that now I have other responsibilities like Draft2Digital, and we're getting ready to do this full-time RV thing, and there's a lot of stuff kind of going on, and I still manage to write every day. I just slowed down production.
That is an amazing production rate, though. And what, do you write almost fully formed? Did you do a lot of work in the edit after your first draft?
I'm a discovery writer, so I don't outline. And when I've got a finished manuscript, most of what gets done in editing is fixing typos and the occasional gaffe. I don't do full rewrites anymore. I used to do that, in a previous writing life, but for the most part, the book comes out the way I intended it to come out. And I have a street team now. I send it to them to get feedback on typos and things, because no matter how I try, I can't catch them all myself.
No.
And sometimes I get some developmental editing out of that. Actually, occasionally people suggest some things, and I realize that that's a weak point in the story, or I could improve that. So my process is just ever evolving as I sort of discover new ideas. The street team idea was revolutionary to me. Because it's, I was paying thousands to editors and still having people complain that there were typos and grammar gaffes and that sort of thing. And I figure, well, I can save that money and use it for other things to help promote the work or whatever. So it's been a nice change.
Yeah, well, I'm very impressed with your work rate. Now, you just alluded to this RV thing. As you described it. And this is fascinating because when we met you down in the west coast of Florida last month, you were, I think, in a hotel at the time, but you were basically doing a little trial run on your RV and doing quite a lot of traveling. But your plan is quite radical with that, yeah?
Yeah. We're my wife and I decided almost 2 years ago now. We put our house up for sale. It took about a year to sell it. We lived in an apartment while we got our lives sort of organized, but we've purchased a 38-foot motor coach, so it's not a small RV, but we're planning to live in that full time for at least a couple of years. And the idea is for me to travel. I'm very inspired by travel, meeting new people and discovering new places. That's always been a very big inspiration for me. And we've traveled overseas quite a bit, but we haven't really traveled the sort of continental U.S. And so we're hopping in. We're going to travel as much as we can manage. Now that I'm working with Draft2Digital, they understand. They knew about this beforehand, and that was part of our deal from the beginning. Was they were very happy to have me do this. I think there's an ulterior motive there because I can be at certain conventions and events.
Yeah, with somewhere to stay.
Really keep the cost down.
Yeah. Although it's a long way to Frankfurt.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a bumpy ride. It's a bumpy drive to Frankfurt from Houston, Texas.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating, and what an interesting thing to do. So obviously, this is something you and your wife both really want to do, and I'm trying to think through the kind of sort of pressures and changes on relationships and stuff when you suddenly go from quite independent lives that we lead today, and in your house you go off and you do stuff, you don't see each other all the time, to suddenly being together in even a 38-foot vehicle. I'm assuming, Kevin, you've thought this all through, right?
We have a lot. One of the reasons we did it the way we did, but we transitioned from a 4-bedroom, fairly large home to a 1-bedroom apartment. That was our first step. And then since getting the RV, we've traveled pretty extensively, vacations and road trips and that sort of thing, and spent time in that. And, my wife and I were very passionate people. And so passionate people tend to sometimes get loud, but we part of this whole thing, honestly, is learning how to live with each other, learning how to, because you do have escape routes when you have a house. For example, I had my office and I had a studio in my home. If I needed some closed door time, it was very easy. This is a little different, although we did make sure we bought an RV that had 3 independent sections that could be sectioned off, cordoned off, so that we could escape each other every now and then. And I do a lot of work from cafes and coffee shops and that sort of thing. So I think we'll manage.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you will. That'd be great to talk to you in a few months' time when you've got a few months under your belt and see how that's going. You're a prodigious podcaster as well, Kevin. So how is all this going to work? You presumably don't have a broadband connection trailing out the back of your RV.
No, I am considering running a very long cable to the Draft2Digital offices in Oklahoma. But for the most part, that's the trickiest part of this. And for anyone listening, by the way, who is in the telecommunications industry, there is a wide open opportunity for servicing RV and mobile lifestyle folks. And there is really no good solution. Satellite internet is both slow and has bandwidth caps. We're going to be heavily dependent on LTE, mobile bandwidth from our mobile phones and hotspots, but that has bandwidth caps. It gets prohibitively expensive. A lot of the RV parks that we may use often have free Wi-Fi, but it's usually very slow. So it's going to be challenging. But I'm prepared. Doing the podcasts, I've worked out ways that this can happen, and it's going to come down mostly to organizing my time more than the resource. If I can find places, there are usually a lot of cities, in particular, have these sort of shared workspaces where you can go and rent a room and utilize their Wi-Fi and that sort of thing. Businesses, sometimes you can, there are places where you can find a comfortable spot. Libraries, public libraries are sometimes available as a resource. So, I've been putting a lot of thought into this.
Yeah, I can see. And say planning your time. So when you get there, you bash out, 6 episodes or something.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
so it'll be tricky, but not impossible.
It's traditional though, Kevin, isn't it? We live in our houses and we're fairly fixed, and we have been, I suppose, for 6 or 7 centuries, but you go back a little bit further than that, and for millennia, people didn't have a fixed abode and they did wander. And as a race, we're not that far away from that. So who knows? This could be a trend. Well, it is a trend, isn't it? I mean, you're not the only one. Yeah.
We're definitely not the only people doing this. Since doing this, I've actually interviewed numerous couples who are doing this full time. Most recently, the Russos from We're the Russos. Shout out. Gone with the Winds. They're another group that does this. And there's this idea, this, nomad culture that's growing in the US. And I think it's largely because we're tired of being tied down in one location. And the way the world has evolved, we don't have to be. We can have our work. We can do our work anywhere. Case in point, I'm doing the marketing work for Draft2Digital and running my author career at the same time. And neither of those things requires me to be in any given location. And
do you think this will impact on your stories, Kevin, from your author point of view?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, in fact, that's the point. I want it to impact my stories. I want to have new locations and new characters and new scenarios flowing past me so fast that I can't use all of them. And that just adds a richness to your work. The more, there was a time in our history where, if you were sophisticated, if you were an aristocrat, if you were a part of higher society, you traveled all the time. It was a given. You maybe spent a month or two at home, and the rest of the time you were traveling, and it was specifically because of that inspiration that comes to you, that growth that comes. And some of our finest authors in history traveled frequently. So this is definitely something top of mind. It was literally the primary motivation for doing this. My wife recognized this in me pretty early on. Wanted to encourage it. She's a saint of a woman, by the way. She'll never hear this, so all she ever hears is me say mean stuff to her.
Listen, I've read some nice stuff about her on your website.
Yes, I need to remember to do that. But she's wonderfully supportive in all this, and she recognized pretty early on that the more I travel, the more output I have, and since she's connected the idea of more output with more money, she's on board.
Strange that. And I think that's a really interesting point, because although we travel more now than we've ever traveled before, there's a normalized nature to traveling, which I don't particularly like. I love flying, but the truth is it's an easy thing to do. You get on this tube, you sit there, you while away a couple of hours, and you can be in Africa, in the Sahara, you can be in Florida, as we were, or you can be in the middle of Europe. And because airports are in cities, so you tend to be in an urban area that looks kind of like, Nairobi doesn't look very much like London, but actually, there are quite a few hotel chains you're going to recognise straight away. But when you think back to, even going a couple of hundred years, people like Mark Twain, you read Huckleberry Finn, and that is a journey. Every detail impacted, and you knew in his life, when Mark Twain travelled 200 miles, it was an ordeal. And it was amazing, and you spotted the change in the vegetation and the animals and the way people's accents changed and all those things that we hardly notice anymore.
Right, and the thing about having our means of not instantaneous, of course, but our means of quickly and rapidly going from one location to another is these locations now become just something consumable. When you're traveling, by road or train or anything that requires you to slow down to a different pace, where you're in that transition. It's during the transition that you pick up the most detail, that you pick up the most inspiration. All the things that affect you as an author in particular, but just in your life, they don't happen generally at point A or point B. They usually happen in the space in between. Yeah. So that's what we're after. We want to explore that space.
That's fantastic. It's not the destination, it's the journey.
Exactly. Yeah. To sum it up much more succinctly.
Superb, Kevin. Look, we've raced through 40 minutes, and it's been really interesting. I knew that the RV would come up, and while talking about it from a writing perspective, I think was very interesting. And I think there must be. It's one of the perennial things, isn't it, for writers? I'm already now thinking about my next couple of books and where's the inspiration going to come from? And, you can sit and you can Google and you can look up things that have happened, and then you can change your circumstance, change who you're talking to, change your surroundings, and you're much more likely to find inspiration from things that you can't even envisage at the moment that's going to happen to you on your journey. So,
yeah.
Cool.
Exactly.
Thank you so much indeed, Kevin, and it's been a real pleasure. We will talk to you when you can find a broadband connection in 6 months' time.
I'll have it all figured out. I got to, Draft2Digital there's still people to find for still authors out there who need our help.
They'll pioneer it and attach something to your RV.
Exactly.
So do you fancy getting into an RV, a recreational vehicle, Mark, and spending the next couple of years, just you and your wife, going, when the kids, obviously, you can't leave them at home, driving around, just stopping off somewhere to do a little bit of work here and there?
Well, I've always been interested in the crystal meth industry after watching Breaking Bad, and that's exactly. I can just imagine myself driving around Wiltshire, parking up in a Farmersville somewhere, cooking up.
Yeah. Have you got an image of Kevin standing there in his underpants? Because that's what Bryan Cranston's.
Well, I have to correct you. You said we met him in London. We didn't. We met Dan Wood in London. But it's an easy mistake to make because they've all got huge beards, or at least they did have, Dan and Kevin and the guys at Draft2Digital. We met Kevin in Florida.
Yes, we did. We met Draft2Digital in London, and then it was Kevin. Yes, and Dan and Kevin. Yes, sorry.
That's right, and the image about Kevin in his underpants, that was a hefty drinking session in Florida, and I don't know what happened in the privacy of your own hotel room, but if they involve you, Kevin, and his underpants, then that's fine.
What happens in Florida stays in Florida. You know the rules. Good. Anyway, he's a great guy, and he's on your side. Really, he's one of those industries that we like. We rate them very highly, and we like them because of their attitude and the way that they organise themselves, and they work with the author to make the author successful, which is what everyone working in this area should do.
Yeah, I love those guys. I'll tell you a funny story. I've been using them for a long time, almost since I started, I think, and I think they moved to new premises a couple of years ago, or something along those lines, or they redecorated their old place, and they emailed me and asked whether I'd mind if they printed a copy of the cover of the Black Mile, which was my first indie book, and so they could frame it and put it on the wall, and that was a nice touch. I don't know whether they did that or not, but it was nice. They obviously didn't have to ask me; they could just have done it. I wouldn't have minded at all. But it was nice that they reached out and said that they would like to do that, which just is kind of a good indication of just how. They're nice. They're really nice people, and they're a pleasure to do business with, and it gives me lots of pleasure to see them doing so well.
Okay, right. You and I have a few more 16-hour days to put in between now and the 30th of November to get this course ready and out there, which is exciting for us. We'll be back next week with another interview and another hopefully value-packed podcast for you. It's possible we're going to recruit a couple more beta testers in the next week or so I know a lot of you are hanging on seeing if you can get that. We should also point out that we did have many thousands of applications for that, so the odds are not in your favour, as the Hunger Games says, but it might be you. As they say, advertising the UK National Lottery. Right, that's it. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the week, and we'll speak to you next Friday.
You've been listening to the Self-Publishing Formula podcast. Visit us at selfpublishingformula.com for more information, show notes, and links on today's topics. You can also sign up for our free video series on using Facebook ads to grow your mailing list. If you've enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review on iTunes. We'll see you next time.